banking reforms. Well, they're going on in that sector. How does it affect the economy? What steps are we taking? What steps should we be taking? Are we doing the things we ought to do? Well, these and some of the issues we should focus on here as we introduce our guest, Tilewa Oyefeso, who is a financial expert. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
A lawyer and a financial expert. Well, I mean, straight off the cuff, I mean, you look at the whole reforms. The intention, of course, to improve the lot of the economy, ultimately Nigerians, because, I mean, no thanks to that strike. They talk about, what is economics? Is it about people or numbers? Just kept on popping up at the time. But now looking at the reforms, with the twists and turns we see now, how would you describe it? Are we achieving the results that we intended?
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying, first of all, that the previous time I was here, I really emphasized on the reforms, and I particularly used the phrase that the reforms actually have brought about economic disequilibrium. And with the current trend, the situation of things as it were today, then we realize that the answers are already materializing, already. Because the idea of the reforms is to improve the lot, of the members of the economy. But what we see today, of course, is different. It's a different picture entirely. I emphasized earlier that the action of the CBN governor in injecting public funds into commercial banks was done inappropriately. And I said that the necessary procedure wasn't followed, by means of obtaining the approval of the National Assembly before, that action. And the reverberating effect is already taking place already. And by the provisions of the Constitution, we had said earlier that it is the duty of the state to ensure that the economy is stable and that members of the society have a right to live in an economy where there is stability. But today, people are losing their jobs as a result of the banking reforms, and so many other things are happening. Now, the question is, what is the way forward?
Okay, well, so before you even go there, I mean, with respect to people losing their jobs, was it expected that, look, when this happens, some of these actions will always be attendant?
Now, the truth of the matter is, where there is a downsizing, as it were, maybe owing to restructuring or reorganization, definitely people usually get laid off, but not in the magnitude, that we have seen over the few days. And first and foremost, I would say again that the necessary provisions of the law, when it comes to matters like this, must be strictly adhered to. If that is not done, then otherwise, is the case. Now, the position is very simple and straightforward. The idea of the reforms is that, look, these banks are in dire situations, and we need to rescue them from, their present condition. That was why those funds were injected into the banks. But apparently, these funds appear to be locked up in the banks, and we cannot really identify, we cannot really lay our hands on the products of this reform, and it's going to about 3 years, now, and that is a clear case of, a clear case of maladministration, particularly when it comes to public office holders.
I'm still yet to understand the correlation between getting permission or seeking appropriation for money spent and the stability of the economy.
Okay, that's a good question, and let me just address it this way. Now, appropriation or disbursing funds into the economy by means of salvaging banks, you understand, is something that goes on in any industry. It's not peculiar to our country here. But you see, once the Act says that the approval of the National Assembly must be sought, it only gives us a picture of the dispensation we are in, which is a democratic dispensation. We saw some few weeks ago how the people reacted to the removal of fuel subsidy. And at the end of the day, we knew that, this is actually what democracy is all about. So the idea of seeking the approval is for the people to for themselves to say that, look, this is our action. Okay, this is what the governor wants to do, and we agree. That is the idea of obtaining the approval, because the members of the National Assembly are there as representatives of the people. So if such magnitude projects are to be done, the National Assembly's approval must be sought, which is the requirement of the law. But having said that, the deed has already been done. Now, moving forward from there, we find out that the effects is what we, are seeing now. And the only way that can be addressed is by the simple, application of the law right now to the situation. And how do I mean? I had said that public office holders have their duties spelled out under the law. Now, it is the duty of every public office holder not to abuse his position by conferring undue advantage, on himself. Now, the question I'm asked is this: how does that fit into this discussion? Oh, you are talking about a public office holder not abusing his position, and I'm saying it fits into this discussion by the fact that there are certain provisions in our laws that talks about public office holders abusing their position, and there are also international treaties which Nigeria has come to recognize that talks about this. And all these issues, I'm saying can be framed within the purview of fundamental rights enforcement proceedings. And how do I mean? I say any member of the society can proceed to court and say, right now, funds have been injected into banks. We are yet to see the results of these funds. And besides, the effect of these reforms is that people are losing their jobs rather than, we having the gains. Understand?
Okay, in an ideal situation, what will be the expected result that they will see if you're done right?
Good question. Well, in an ideal situation, the expected result will be that when these funds have been injected, then the economy will be wired up again. How do I mean? These banks will be able to function at the level at which they were meant to operate. They have policies, banking policies, that has to do with supporting small medium enterprises and scale industries by giving them funds to develop infrastructure, to build factories, to do business and provide products and services to the people. But you see, right now it's a different picture, because even the banks up to today cannot tell us that they found their footing, because a lot of them are still struggling, which is inexplicable in what we are seeing, presently.
You don't put it down to a simple lack of confidence. For instance, if you understand that your bank, the bank which you regularly bank with, was on the verge of failing, but now it's been restored, money has been injected into it, and as such it's back from the brink, would you still have confidence to keep banking in that same bank, regardless of whatever other assurances have been given you?
I didn't get that question. Can you go over the question?
I'm saying that, isn't this a simple lack of confidence in the banks, the banks that were on the verge of failing, or the banks that already failed and that monies were injected into? For instance, we do know a couple of people that if you're told that your bank has failed, but never mind, we have injected funds into it to buy up the bad debts and also give it some money to continue to operate, would you still have the confidence to keep banking in that bank? Wouldn't it be safer for you to just remove your money and say, hey, I don't want to have anything to do with this bank? Can all of this be attributed to a simple lack of confidence? Confidence yet to return to the markets?
Well, the way I would answer that question is this. When we talk about the market, like we talk about the market now, we are looking at a larger picture. It's not just the banking sector, but the capital market as well. So now, this brings me to the point where we realize that it is not just the banking sector now, but the capital market in a way is also involved in this whole scenario. Why? Because the confidence that you talk about here has to do with confidence in banking, then confidence in the general market. And now a lot of people fail to realize that what the action of the CBN actually borders on the fact that these funds were injected into these banks because they were in grave situations. How do I mean grave situations? Most of them had bad loans. Now, what are bad loans? When we were told the definition of bad loans, or let me just say the definition of bad loans in simple terms, was that these banks had margin loans. And what are margin loans? These margin loans were loans that were obtained by capital market operators from the banks and were put into the capital market. And the effect of that was misrepresentation on the part of the capital market operators that, look, the capital market is doing fine. Bank stocks has risen. And a lot of Nigerians, innocent Nigerians, put money into the capital market during this period, and all of a sudden their fingers got burnt and everybody said, oh, the capital market has collapsed. I'm still talking about confidence in the system now, that the capital market has collapsed. And the reason for the collapse are that most of them were trading with margin loans. And margin loans, as it were, these are contracts between banks and these stockbrokers. It had nothing to do with, the members of the public. And I say this with all sense of sincerity, that a lot of people involved in this entire process, including the regulators in the capital market and members in the banking industry, really ought to be investigated. They really ought to be investigated, because the effect of that was that trillions of money was lost in the capital market. Then again, the bank said, well, these loans, we have given them out, they are margin loans, they can't pay back. Then the CBN governor moved him through AMCON, to rescue the situation. That's the gamut, the picture of this whole thing. But now, how does a member of the society, how does it fall in into this? The ultimate question is, where does a member of the public, where does he fit in all this? The truth of the matter is that a member of the public today wakes up in the morning with the mentality that, oh, fine, we fought for the removal of subsidy over the few weeks. We tried our best. We achieved the results. I was buying for 65 naira, now I'm buying for 97 naira. Oh, I have so and stocks in Zenith. I had expectations when I bought it. Today I was expecting that those funds will have appreciated, but now they are locked up, in the capital. What do I do? Where do I go from there? What are the authorities? Who are those that will protect me? Who are those that can stand up and fight for me in this regard? So is it as it were? It is like nothing can really be done about all these things. Let's just accept it hook, line and sinker and continue living on. But the truth of the matter is, there's always an avenue, for change. And that is the point I'm trying to emphasize. That, look, our courts have established certain mediums through which matters like this can be easily ventilated. And one of it is this. Oh, I'm a worker. I got to the office this morning and I was told to go back home. I can't have access to my computer because they've told me I've lost my job. Now, the question is, what do I do? Now, there's another point of emphasis here. The National Industrial Court, as it were, has become a special court in our country today. In the last few months, certain events happened. President Goodluck Jonathan, by the third alteration of the Constitution, has made the National Industrial Court a superior court of record, meaning that a lot of disputes, not limited to just labor and industrial relations, but master-servant relationship can also be taken in the National Industrial Court.
Okay, but there are procedures for disengaging members or people who are working.
Exactly.
So they're expected to take that matter up if they feel they've been hard done.
Thank you very much. And they can do that today at the National Industrial Court.
Okay.
And obtain
last year, specifically in October, you wrote, and going through your writings and trying to look at all of this reform, but again, you also noted that the central bank governor claimed to be vested with such powers from the Bofia Act, which you also acknowledged in your writing. And you said, the Act, which is Section 34 of the Bofia, it deals with the supervisory jurisdiction of the CBN when banks have been adjudged to be in grave situations. And if you look at all of that, does that also apply to the SAC that is seen in most banks today? Can they also step in when you talk about the Bofia that gives the CBN some powers to oversee these institutions?
Okay, I would answer that question this way. The powers of the CBN governor to regulate banks is supervisory, based on the BOFIA. It has to do with, the management of this bank is not doing well. I remove the management of this bank and replace, the management of these banks. He has powers to do that, but he doesn't have power to sack employees of banks, of course, because they would have a contract of employment between them and their masters, and their relationship is governed by that contract. Now again, the central bank governor does not have the powers to inject public funds unilaterally into the banks. I insist on that point, because there's no provision in the BOFIA, there's no provision in the CBN Act that donates such powers on him. Analysts usually say that, fine, those provisions may not be in the CBN Act or in the BOFIA, but there's a section 10 of the Interpretation Act that gives him implied powers. So if you are saying he has powers to supervise, it should also mean that the supervisory jurisdiction should also extend to injecting public funds. But I say, hey, we are talking about public funds here, not funds that belong to any specific individual.
Sorry, how did that all come to an end? Because I remember then Representative Femi Gbajabiamila was also on that particular matter in the House.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila's case was quite an interesting one, because, he proceeded to the court as a member of the House to challenge, the action of the CBN. But his case was struck out respectfully on grounds of technicalities. What the court noted then was that the affidavit that was deposed to in his originating summons was actually deposed to by another legal practitioner that did not have personal knowledge of the facts as Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila would. So on that ground, that suit was struck out. It will have been a clear-cut opportunity for the court to pronounce, on that issue, because it was one of the prayers in that claim. But I am saying today that we can subsume it under the fundamental rights enforcement proceedings, meaning that you and I could proceed to any court that has jurisdiction, particularly the Federal High Court, and request the court to determine whether or not such powers to inject public funds into banks without legislative approval is vested.
So how do you link this now? We'll talk about reforms in the sector, and we're getting to see some kind of increase in unemployment rates in that particular banking sector. Is that a plus for the reform, or?
Well, it's a big minus for the reforms, because I remember I had emphasized on the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and this also comes to play, these issues, because I said here that Chapter 2 of the Constitution, particularly Section 16, says that it is the duty of the state to ensure that there is a balanced economy. Now, the Fiscal Responsibility Act says that that act was enacted to give effect to that section of the Constitution, meaning that that section is no longer non-justiciable, as lawyers will say, but can be enforced. And how do you now enforce it? This is the same way you can do it, okay? Based on the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it says that in handling public finance, you must be responsible, you must be accountable, you must be transparent. Members of the public must be involved in any decision you are making. And the Charter on Human Rights, particularly Article 13, says that it is the duty of the state to ensure participation of the people in decision-making processes. Now, participation of the people is not restricted to political elections and campaigns. It also involves the people being actively involved in decision-making processes of government, e.g., injection of public funds into banks.
I'm still wondering, I don't know if it seems like as if I'm taking you back again. Okay. Assuming, let's make some assumptions now. Assuming the CBN governor had taken this particular matter, sought appropriation from the National Assembly, and it had been approved, the funds had been approved. Are you saying that we will not find ourselves in this situation?
Now, you see, it's very easy to assume. We could assume. Fine. I said here the last time I came that had it been the central bank governor had presented the proposal, of course, members of the House are responsible people. Look at the subsidy removal issue. You find out that they were they were opposed, to it, and they took their stand. Now, there's what we call public purpose doctrine. And easily, if he had gone into the House, I can assure you that he would have been asked whether or not the action to inject those funds into the banks would constitute public purpose. Meaning, how will it eventually benefit you and I? How will it benefit members of the public? What is the direct benefit for the injection of these funds? These funds, can't we put it into housing? Can't we use it to build factories? Can't we use it to do some other things? Can't we build railways? Because in law, these are the things that constitute public purpose. But injecting funds into banks actually means, you are putting money into these banks, maybe to confer private interests.
I hope it's not as if that was just some kind of palliative for the meantime, because at that point in time, people didn't see this kind of mass sack. But after almost 3 years, people are getting to see some kind of mass sack. Is it an indication that we're about to see another bailout for some banks?
Well, it's just an indication that we should still see more of the sacks in the next few days and months.
Well, what do you think would have happened there? Because here we are now, assuming, because it seems that from all the questions that you have asked, that you think that the members of the House of Representatives and members of the Senate would have asked, this monies most likely would not have been approved for the bailout of banks. In that event, the banks would have gone under.
Well, I would not want to agree with you in that direction, because how do you explain banks going under? That's the first question. Why? Because banks are there and they have been there.
But those banks not in a bad shape.
Well,
you seem to be contesting that as well.
We can contest it. Why? Because I would also want to allude here right now to the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. And that is the reason we can contest it. For instance, it was the CBN governor and his management team that went into these banks. You and I are not privy to the circumstances or to the facts and the figures. But right now, today, there's the Freedom of Information Act that says that a member of the public, you and I as well, can go to the CBN office. We can go to the office of the Minister of Finance and say, oh, you said you did so and so in this bank. We want records published so that we can really, have the details.
All right,
so that we will not continue to work on assumptions.
All right.
Because it could be frustrating to assume at times.
Okay, we'll have to go for the headlines, but just quickly on this one, because I think my colleagues raised it also. Analysts have also argued, say, well, when the CBN governor took over the 9 build-out banks, in the second quarter of 2009, some of the banks have been using expanded discount window for long-term borrowing as opposed to short-term fund needs. Majority of these banks were unable to pay back the funds because they were in precarious cash positions. What would he have done? Let this continue? He had to do something.
Well, you talk about the expanded discount window, and I want to tell you that even if he had to do what he did, he could as well go through that same process of the expanded discount window, because that was how the former CBN governor assisted the banks, with funds.
Yeah, but wasn't that faulty? Wasn't that why we had access to credit not getting to the people who actually needed it, SMEs?
You see, it's when we consider corporate issues like this, you find out that it is the banking system itself. You see, when you talk about the bank has directors, they have policies. It could be that the directors of the banks are reckless.